Imagine the most unexpected moment in a political speech, one so jaw-dropping that it leaves you speechless. Now picture that moment happening at the expense of a marriage, a first lady humiliated live in front of millions. This isn't just another Donald Trump rally. This is an explosive revelation that took his marriage and turned it into his latest circus act. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. In today's video, we're diving into a shocking moment where Donald Trump betrays Melania on air, exposing a deep rift behind the scenes. From his bizarre impersonations to dragging Melania into his political theater against her wishes, we'll explore how this unexpected meltdown at the University of Alabama is more than just a distraction. It's a window into Trump's unraveling legal defense and the collateral damage to his wife's reputation. Stay tuned as we break down how this moment reveals the true nature of Trump's chaotic leadership. The greatest moments in life are often like weightlifting, where records stand untouched for years. Imagine a record that hasn't been broken in 18 years, and then suddenly, someone comes along to shatter it. Well, Donald Trump took a similar approach, though instead of lifting weights, he was lifting something far more delicate, his own marriage. And instead of taking a monumental moment of glory, it was more like a disastrous misstep on a very public stage. Trump was making a seemingly normal speech, just another day of rambling about fake news and his grievances. But then, the unexpected happened. Without warning, he turned his attention to his wife, Melania. The speech, which could have been about anything else, suddenly became a bizarre, impromptu roast of Melania herself. And what was the subject of the joke? Trump's own attempts at impersonating Melania. Picture this: Trump on stage, mocking his wife's accent, laughing off her objections to his behavior as though it was just part of the show. Now, Melania has always been a reserved figure, someone who shied away from the spotlight for much of Trump's presidency. But this moment, this live broadcast, thrust her into it in a way she never asked for. As Trump continued his odd impersonation, he let the audience in on a private matter: how his wife, Melania, had told him she didn't approve of his antics. In fact, she found his little imitations embarrassing and told him it wasn't presidential. But of course, Trump couldn't resist. It became a moment of spectacle, with the crowd laughing at Melania's expense. Meanwhile, Melania stood at the sidelines, visibly uncomfortable, her expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. What was supposed to be a routine rally quickly turned into an accidental episode of Real Housewives of Marigot, starring Melania as the unamused plus one to Trump's drama. The crowd roared with laughter at his antics, but Melania didn't share in that amusement. She wasn't part of the joke, she was the target. While Trump continued to entertain, she was left to silently endure the humiliation. The more the crowd laughed, the more isolated and embarrassed she seemed, not at all amused by the role she had been forced into. It wasn't just a slip-up, it was a public betrayal. Trump didn't just make a joke, he exposed a raw, personal dynamic of their marriage, turning it into fodder for the masses. He used Melania as a prop for his performance, knowing full well that she didn't want to be involved. It wasn't just an unfortunate moment, it was calculated. He knew what he was doing, and yet continued to make Melania the punchline, seemingly without a second thought. In that moment, the rally was no longer about policy or politics, it became about ego. Donald Trump, in his own way, was proving once again that his brand of leadership is all about spectacle, all about creating chaos. He doesn't need a teleprompter, he doesn't need a script, he just needs a microphone and the stage. And even the people closest to him aren't off limits for the sake of a laugh. And then, there's the audience. They ate it up. They didn't see a man undermining his own wife. They saw a larger-than-life personality doing what he does best, keeping the crowd entertained, no matter the cost. This moment wasn't about policy or his presidency. It was about giving the audience what they wanted: drama, chaos, and a glimpse behind the curtain of Trump's personal life. In this twisted version of reality TV, Melania was the unsuspecting guest star who hadn't signed up for the role. In the end, we saw the true Trump emerge, an ego-driven figure who didn't care about crossing boundaries, even when it came to his own family. And Melania? She was caught in the crossfire of his latest spectacle, a woman forced to endure a public humiliation that no one saw coming, least of all her. So, why did Donald Trump suddenly drag his wife Melania into his latest public meltdown? What prompted this bizarre turn of events at the University of Alabama, where Trump seemed to be operating with a script that could only be described as erratic at best? Well, it all starts with Trump's political and legal landscape, a place where everything seems to be falling apart. It's no secret that Trump's legal woes have been mounting. Lawsuits, investigations, and an increasingly fragile defense are making him look more like a cornered man than the confident leader he once portrayed himself to be. In a world where facts are piling up against him, Trump has always had a fallback strategy: distraction. And this time, the distraction was a deep dive into culture wars, which he seems to think will shift the conversation away from his crumbling empire. The timing was no coincidence. Just before this speech, Trump was locked in a battle with Maine Governor Janet Mills, a fight that illustrated his growing desperation. Mills had stood up to him, refusing to bow to Trump's demands to defund schools in her state over transgender athletes' participation in sports. Trump, who thrives on power and control, couldn't stomach the idea of losing to a woman in leadership. His fragile ego couldn't take it, so he responded in his usual fashion. A full-throttle attack, using every tool at his disposal to deflect from his own failures. But here's where it gets even stranger. Instead of focusing on the political battle at hand, Trump turned to a more personal tactic: attacking Melania. In a speech that was supposed to rally his base, Trump used his own wife as a prop, an example of his own personal frustrations. This wasn't just about politics, it was about defending his image. To deflect from the real crisis, Trump turned to the tried-and-true method of turning personal relationships into political theater. Melania's name came up not because she was involved in the debate, but because Trump knew that using her name would grab attention. Trump, ever the showman, recounted the moment when Melania had disapproved of his antics, jokingly imitating her in front of the crowd as if it were a skit. "It's not presidential," he mocked, imitating her tone and accent, as if to say, "Look at me, I'm so confident I can laugh at my own wife, and you're all going to laugh too." But the reality was far different. Melania wasn't part of this act. She didn't want to be the punchline. She didn't ask to be dragged into this circus. In fact, she had clearly expressed her discomfort with his behavior. Yet there he was, doubling down on the jokes. This moment, however, was much more than just an embarrassing speech. It was a deflection. Trump, facing yet another legal setback with Governor Mills, needed to shift the conversation away from his latest defeat. So, he did what he does best. He created a spectacle, turning a serious political issue into a sideshow. In a way, it was genius on Trump's part, using personal humiliation to divert attention away from the real issues that were creeping up on him. Why Melania, though? Why choose this particular moment to publicly humiliate her? It goes beyond just wanting a laugh or seeking attention. It's about power. By mentioning Melania in the way he did, Trump was reasserting his dominance over both the political narrative and his personal life. It's a pattern we've seen throughout his career. If you can't control the narrative with facts, you control it with spectacle. Trump's need to dominate and control every situation led him to a place where, instead of sticking to his supposed political objectives, he used his wife's disapproval as fodder for his ego. This wasn't the first time Melania had been thrown under the bus in public, but this speech added a new layer of audacity to it. To most outsiders, this might seem like a typical Trumpian gaffe, an embarrassing moment where he couldn't help himself. But for those who have followed Trump's career, it's a reminder of a troubling pattern of behavior: his need to humiliate and belittle those around him to maintain his image of power and control. The thing is, Melania had largely kept her distance from the political spotlight for much of her husband's presidency. She was a background figure, rarely participating in the campaign trail and making only occasional public appearances. But when she did show up, it was typically a photo op, a carefully controlled moment, and when she didn't appear, the absence was always noticeable. In this speech, however, Trump wasn't just making light of her absence. He was practically flaunting it, using her discontent as a joke, all while his own legal problems and political disarray continued to escalate. As Trump rambled about Governor Mills and transgender athletes, Melania's absence loomed large. She wasn't just an absent wife. She was a symbol of the quiet resistance to the chaos Trump had brought upon the country. And while Trump turned his wife into a punchline for the crowd, Melania stayed out of the limelight, likely hoping to maintain some shred of dignity. But despite her silence, Trump couldn't stop talking about her. It was as if he wanted to make sure that even her silence became part of his performance. In his own way, he was trying to assert control over her image, over their relationship, and over how the public would perceive her. In the end, this wasn't just a speech. It was a reflection of Trump's desperation to remain relevant. Faced with mounting legal challenges, dwindling support, and a growing political and public crisis, Trump resorted to using his own wife as a tool to distract, humiliate, and regain some semblance of control. But in doing so, he exposed not just the cracks in his own marriage, but the dangerous reality of a man who would do anything to keep the spotlight on him, even at the expense of those closest to him. Now let's focus on the glaring reality of the situation. Melania Trump wasn't even at the event. The woman who had been dragged into this public spectacle wasn't there to witness it firsthand. And that in itself speaks volumes. If there's one thing that's clear, it's that Melania didn't want to be a part of this circus. In fact, she probably would have preferred to stay as far away from the spotlight as possible. If looks could kill, we can only imagine what kind of death glare she was shooting at the screen from wherever she was, probably in the quiet of Mar-a-Lago, far from the chaos her husband was creating on stage. Trump, though, wasn't concerned with the absence of his wife. He seemed to relish in the fact that he could continue talking about her, using her name as if it were part of the show he had put on. In his mind, he was delivering the ultimate punchline. The audience didn't know the backstory. They didn't know that Melania had explicitly told him she didn't like being part of his act, that she didn't find his impersonations funny, and that she thought it was far from presidential. To them, it was just another moment of Trump being Trump, carefree, unbothered by the consequences, and full of himself. For Trump, this was just another chance to throw out a joke and bask in the applause. But the truth was much darker beneath the surface. Melania's absence was one of the loudest things about this entire debacle. She wasn't there because she didn't want to be there. And yet, Donald Trump turned her absence into the focal point of his speech. He didn't just talk about her. He used her silence to fuel his narrative. "She's not here, but I'll tell you what she'd say," he seemed to suggest, portraying Melania's supposed disapproval as a quirky, laughable part of their marriage. The entire crowd laughed along, but that laughter felt hollow, as if they were laughing at something they didn't fully understand. And in truth, they didn't. They didn't understand how humiliating this must have been for Melania, how tired she must have been of playing the role of the reluctant First Lady in her husband's ongoing performance. But this isn't just about a woman who was humiliated on stage, it's about the power dynamics at play. Trump wasn't just playing the role of an entertainer here. He was exploiting the one person who, for all intents and purposes, had been sidelined throughout his presidency. Melania had kept a low profile, rarely speaking out, avoiding public confrontations. She had made it clear that she wasn't interested in being a political figure or being dragged into the media circus. But Trump, in all his egotistical glory, couldn't let her remain in the background. He needed her to be part of the show. And when she didn't want to cooperate, he turned her absence into a spectacle, using it to fuel his political narrative. While Trump was out there, making strange comparisons about sports, weightlifting, and transgender athletes, he was also creating a narrative where his own wife's discomfort was just another part of his show. "Look at me," he seemed to say. "Even my wife thinks I'm crossing the line." But this wasn't a marriage in crisis for comedic effect. This was a real issue. The fact that Trump was airing their marital frustrations on stage was a betrayal of the most personal kind. His behavior was embarrassing, not only to Melania, but to anyone watching with an ounce of empathy. But what was Trump trying to accomplish with this odd display? It wasn't just about making a joke or even drawing attention to the culture war issues he was ranting about. It was about reinforcing his dominance, both politically and personally. By dragging Melania into the spotlight, he was solidifying his role as the center of the universe, the one who controls the narrative, even at the expense of those closest to him. It didn't matter that his wife wasn't there to defend herself or to express her discomfort. Trump was going to use her absence, and even her disapproval as another tool to deflect attention from his own failing political and legal situation. While Trump was making jokes about volleyballs and transgender athletes, the real issues were playing out behind the scenes. His legal battles, the ongoing investigations, and his flagging popularity were all things Trump couldn't control. So, what did he do? He created a spectacle. He performed. He distracted the audience with his grandiose personality, his ability to dominate the stage, and of course his marriage. Because if there's one thing Trump understands, it's how to keep people talking about him, no matter the cost. Melania, in contrast, was nowhere to be found. She didn't show up to the event, and she hadn't shown up to much else throughout Trump's chaotic presidency. And that absence became the narrative. Even when she wasn't physically present, her silence was more powerful than anything Trump could have said about her. It was a message in itself. It was a statement of resistance, of unwillingness to participate in the madness her husband had created. The more Trump tried to pull her into his drama, the more she faded into the background, refusing to give him the satisfaction of engagement. And while Trump played his political game on stage, Melania was trying to live her life away from the chaos. At this point, it was clear that Melania's presence in her husband's life had become more of an obligation than a choice. She was no longer a partner, she was a silent bystander to his egocentric world. And Trump? He was perfectly fine with that. He didn't care that Melania was absent, he just cared that the audience was watching him. He needed their attention, and he got it by turning Melania's absence into another political stunt. In this bizarre moment, Trump managed to humiliate his wife and distract from his own failings all at once. And while he may have walked away from that rally with applause, it was clear that Melania, though silent, had the final word. Her absence said everything Trump couldn't say aloud, that the real crisis wasn't his political battles or his legal troubles. The real crisis was his fractured relationship. And yet, he couldn't even leave that alone. His desperate need for control and attention was overshadowing everything, even the one relationship that was supposed to matter most. At the end of the day, Melania's absence from the event spoke louder than anything Donald Trump said on that stage. When you really sit back and think about it, her silence was the most profound message of all. She wasn't there, not because of any scheduling conflict or a sudden change of plans, but because she chose not to be. And that choice, her decision to stay away, made a statement that resonated far more deeply than anything Trump could have said about her or anyone else. Melania had been through this before. The public humiliation, the uncomfortable moments when Trump's words and actions pushed her into the limelight, whether she liked it or not. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just another public appearance that she'd reluctantly agreed to for the sake of appearances. No, this was a choice to distance herself from her husband's chaos. A quiet, yet deliberate act of self-preservation. And what does that say about the state of their marriage? The optics of it all paint a vivid picture. When a wife feels the need to stay away from her husband's public spectacle, not out of obligation, but out of a desire to keep her dignity intact, it's a powerful symbol of a relationship that's teetering on the edge. Melania's absence wasn't just a logistical detail. It was an emotional statement. She was not only refusing to play the part Trump had written for her, she was actively rejecting the role he had assigned to her in his public drama. This wasn't just about a marriage on the rocks. It was about a woman who had been forced to endure years of public ridicule and personal discomfort. And now, she was choosing to reclaim her own space away from the circus. It's almost poetic in its simplicity. While Trump ranted on stage, throwing out insults and impersonations, Melania was elsewhere, probably in the quiet of her private space, far from the noise. And as much as Trump tried to draw her into his performance, she wasn't buying it anymore. Her silence, her absence, became the loudest form of resistance. It was her way of saying, "I've had enough of this." And while Trump paraded his opinions, his political tirades, and his never-ending need for attention, Melania chose to be the one thing he couldn't control in that moment: silent, absent, and indifferent to the spectacle. What does this silence say about Melania's role in Trump's world? For the longest time, she had been the quiet First Lady, often relegated to the background, and while there were brief moments where she appeared to be more involved, it was clear that her heart wasn't fully in it. She was living in the shadow of her husband's larger-than-life persona, constantly caught in the media glare, whether she wanted it or not. But now, in 2025, as Trump continues his campaign, it seems she has made the conscious decision to step even further back. This time, she wasn't just hiding from the cameras, she was making her absence known. And that absence said everything. It said that she was no longer willing to be a pawn in Trump's political theater. Melania's silence also speaks to a much bigger issue: the toxic nature of the public persona that Trump has cultivated. His entire political career, his rallies, and his speeches have been built around this concept of spectacle and entertainment. He thrives on attention, chaos, and drama. But Melania's absence is a stark reminder that not everyone wants to be part of that narrative. While Trump continues to perform for the cameras, Melania is quietly slipping away from the role that he's tried to force upon her. She's not interested in being the supporting character in his reality show anymore, and that's exactly why she wasn't there. And let's be clear, this isn't just a case of a wife choosing not to participate in a campaign event. This is a rejection of the entire circus that Trump has created around his life and presidency. His rallies are no longer about policy or leadership. They've become performances, with Trump at the center, surrounded by his loyal supporters, each event carefully orchestrated for maximum drama. But Melania has opted out of this act. She's no longer part of the show, and by doing so, she's sending a clear message: she's not interested in the drama anymore. But Trump, he couldn't resist. Even in Melania's absence, he kept talking about her. He kept trying to force her into the narrative, as though her absence was part of the script. He tried to spin it like she was just too upset with him to show up, making light of the situation as if their private issues were something to be laughed at. But here's the thing: Melania's absence wasn't a joke. It wasn't something that could be laughed off in front of a cheering crowd. It was her way of drawing a line in the sand, of saying, enough. There's something deeply troubling about Trump's constant need to bring his wife into the spotlight, even when she's not there to defend herself. He uses her as a prop, a tool to further his political narrative, and when she doesn't play along, he turns her absence into another part of his performance. But Melania, in her quiet refusal to engage, holds a power that Trump can't control. Her silence is a quiet act of rebellion against the spectacle he's trying to create. And in this moment, Melania's absence speaks louder than any speech Trump could have given. This entire scenario is a microcosm of the larger dysfunction at play. It's not just about Melania and Trump's marriage. It's about a larger pattern of behavior where Trump uses people, including his own wife, as pawns in his endless quest for power and attention. He turns every personal relationship into a public spectacle, using it as a distraction from the real issues at hand. But this time, Melania didn't play along. She chose to disappear from the stage, leaving Trump to face the consequences of his own actions without her. In a way, Melania's absence might just be the most significant moment in this entire chaotic spectacle. It's the moment where she said, "I'm done." She wasn't there to be the punchline of Trump's jokes. She wasn't there to be part of his political game. She was somewhere else, quietly reclaiming her space, her dignity, and her autonomy. And in doing so, she made a powerful statement without saying a word. So there you have it, Donald Trump, once again, turning his personal life into a political spectacle. But in the end, it's Melania's absence that speaks the loudest. Her choice to step out of the spotlight, her refusal to be part of the ongoing circus, is a statement in itself. a powerful act of silence that carries more weight than any of Trump's words or performances. In a world that's constantly craving drama, it's clear that Melania is no longer willing to be the pawn in her husband's political game. And while Trump continues to do what he does best, distract, deflect, and entertain, the real question remains: how long can he keep using his personal relationships to mask the growing cracks in his political empire? As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe Melania's absence is a subtle act of defiance, or is it just another chapter in the Trump saga? Hit that like button if you found this breakdown insightful, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world of politics, drama, and everything in between. Thank you for watching, and see you in next video.